Replace your print servers with a secure cloud solution that scales with you. You'll automate print management, get scalability and flexibility, as well as complete control with visibility into all your print processes. Start a free 30-day trial by going to printerlogic.com/packet pushers.
Hi, I'm Jonna Till Johnson, CEO of Nemertes, here with my co-host John Burke.
Yo.
Yo. And you're listening to Heavy Strategy, the show that aims at asking the right questions, not giving the right answers. On today's show, we're going to be talking quite a bit about infrastructure architecture for AI. But before we do that, I would love to share some of our follow-up from one of our listeners who actually takes issue with some of how we've been doing things, and we like how he took issue. So he writes, "Heavy strategy has been like blue cheese to me." Huh? Much like mold in blue cheese, I found the at times stark disagreement and bickering between the hosts slightly offensive, but I've learned to like it a lot over time. It makes it a lot more interesting. Episode 80 was more about the answers than the questions, in my opinion. You were too much in agreement, other viewpoints weren't presented, and there was no meaningful discussion. It didn't really make me contemplate or process the question or different positions on the matter much. Said another way, there was no mold in the blue cheese. I don't know that I've ever been called mold, John, but I like it. And
are you sure you were the mold? I could have been the mold. You could have been the blue cheese.
Well, I don't think there is blue cheese without mold, is his point. So we both have to be kind of moldy. So thank you for that. And taking that aboard, John and I actually do have slightly differing positions on cloud versus on-prem versus hybrid versus edge when it comes to what is the right architecture for AI. And let me just kind of frame the question. Everybody's all caught up in, what do we do with AI models? How do we train the models? How do we protect the data? How do we avoid bias? All those fun things. The question that gets asked too infrequently from our perspective is, hey, how does this change the architecture that I have in place, which includes but is not limited to cloud? Many organizations have on-prem data centers. Most organizations have networks. There's certainly storage to consider. There's a lot more to consider. If you are going to embrace AI, how are these things going to change? And John and I do have a legitimate disagreement on this. I will say right up front that I'm a huge fan of the concept of edge computing for AI, which is not necessarily what you're going to see if you try to Google it. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But John, I know you have some thoughts on what is currently happening in AI infrastructure. So take it away.
I guess I'm just going to stake out the extreme position that most people, most of the time, should be doing their AI development and training in cloud environments. And that's not to say that I don't think on-premises computing is legitimate and wonderful and belongs in the portfolio with everything else. I certainly do and have defended that position many times. But for most folks, in most situations, they're going to be able to do what they need to do, which is dynamically scale up for training operations and development work, and then scale down for active inference for systems that they deploy. They're going to be able to do that more easily and more economically if they're using cloud environments. And in fact, in our most recent research project, the results of which have not yet officially been released, almost 2/3 of the folks who do development and training do it in cloud environments. And only 50% do it in on-premises environments. So obviously there's some overlap there. So there's some folks who are doing both, but a solid majority are doing it in the cloud. And I'll just throw in, only 12% are currently doing it on the enterprise edge. So smoke that.
Oh, yeah, right, John? Well, I would retaliate by saying, yeah, that's what people are doing today, but it's early days. I know that some of our larger clients have talked to us about edge computing for a while. And I will highlight something, which is most of the use cases for generative AI and LLMs at the moment are things like, help me automate better by cutting and pasting snippets from scripts so I don't have to pay a programmer to do that. Or help me ideate for a project, come up with a first draft that I can then edit, come up with ideas. If I'm writing some code, give me a whole bunch of wild ideas for parameters that I should be using to write the code. The classic example is I'm building a database to track something. What are all the fields in the database and what should they be? AI is terrific at that. These are all information technology, computer type use cases. Where you're going to see AI really starting to look interesting is if, for example, it's controlling a drone fleet or IoT on a manufacturing shop floor or some other physical device. And back in the day, i.e. 5 years ago, when we first started talking a lot about edge computing, a huge reason for having edge computing solutions, and I'm talking about stuff like Amazon Snowball, right? These are devices, these are data center in a box kinds of solutions that get installed very close to where the data is actually getting used, largely in a scenario where the data is getting used to move physical things in the real world. And the reason for that is quite simply that you can't stand the latency of going all the way back to the cloud and coming back. So if you're saying, I need to decide where to move this robot on the manufacturing floor, and the latency is half a second to get to Amazon in the cloud, forget it. Or, to OpenAI or Microsoft, forget it. It's just not going to happen. So I would caveat my support of thinking about edge computing with the fact that one of the big use cases is under development, and we probably won't see it for another couple of years, which is AI and IoT.
If by exciting future possibilities for AI and IoT, you mean frightening and potentially catastrophic, I'm with you there. I mean, we're all into Skynet with the robot factories and the robot drone fleets. But I will just point out that it's equally possible to have those edge facilities be part of your cloud provider's infrastructure rather than yours. And you get all the benefits still there of having a cloud provider. They're handling power, cooling, redundancy, et cetera. And I mean, I remember it might have been 8-9 years ago, going through this beautiful CenturyLink / Lumen study of how much of the country they had a facility within 5 milliseconds of. So they're into the real-time responsiveness, time distance, I guess is what we should call it. They're into hard real-time.
Latency is fine.
Latency is good. Thank you. They're into the hard real-time latency distance for, I think it was 80% of United States cities. And, part of that's the legacy of old telephone systems. They've got data centers or the potential for data centers everywhere as they replace phone switching equipment with general computing equipment.
I'm going to push back on that, John, because, and I should have these numbers at my fingertips and certainly would welcome any listeners weighing in on this, but I'm going to push back because latency back in the old days of, I need to get a response fairly quickly is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about much, much lower latencies in order to make a very complex decision, which means there's an awful lot more computing that has to happen at the AI front before I can move that robot, that robot arm a millimeter. And that has to happen really fast. I mean, just imagine, for the sake of argument, that you're a doctor conducting AI-enhanced telesurgery. Okay, I really need to move fast to clamp that blood vessel so the patient doesn't die, and I need to know where to clamp it, and AI is telling me over here, over there. It's not even in the same order of magnitude as trying to do some, database processing or something. So it's great that Lumen CenturyLink had fantastic, solutions for old school requirements. This is a brand new use case, is what I would point out.
I think most real-time control use cases still fall well within the 5 millisecond round trip time.
But are you factoring
and the
in
ones that don't would be suitable cases for on-premises stuff? But I think you're shaving off an edge case on an edge case in that case.
I would disagree simply because you're not factoring in the additional latency injected by the AI computation itself. As we know, anyone that's used OpenAI knows you hit the button and then you go get a cup of coffee to get your responses. Of course, that's just because they want you to upgrade to the paid version. But the point is also the case that actually doing the processing is incredibly CPU intensive and takes a while. So it's great that you can say I can do all this within 5 milliseconds, but all this now takes, 500 or 1,000 milliseconds or 5,000 milliseconds. you got to scrunch it down and carve off everything you can possibly carve off to optimize that performance. That would be my argument.
Again, I'll say edge case on an edge case to get to the point where you actually have to have that computation happening on premises because you can't accommodate the sub 5-second round trip to and from somebody else's computation infrastructure. The point is the computation is happening close to the need. And I think for most folks, it's going to be fine if that is somebody else's data center a half a mile away rather than my data center, 500 yards away in a building across campus from me.
Well, and I know there's other considerations we probably want to jump into in a second, but I just also want to weigh in that the whole notion of having a colo or carrier facility, that's an option, but in my view, that still represents an edge computing architecture because you're basically saying what we're quibbling about is the location of the edge and the provider of the edge. You're saying, I'm not going all the way to Amazon's, resident cloud, which might be 300 or 500 miles away. I'm going to something living in a colo, which, by the way, you pointed out, none of the people that we talked to are doing yet. But
Indeed.
or to a box that might be provided by Amazon as living right outside my factory, which in fact about 12% of people are currently doing, which is kind of a lot for an edge case on an edge case, I'd just say.
I don't think they're doing that, speaking to our 12%, using Amazon's, cloud outpost type infrastructure stuff. I think they've plugged their own technology stacks into edge facilities, their factories, whatever it is.
Yeah, fair enough.
And they're running that there. But yes, I agree. Arguing about the edge case on the edge case is somewhat beside the point when what's going to dominate people's decision making in a lot of cases is how much of the time am I going to keep my AI infrastructure, the training and development stuff, busy? And is it going to be 24/7? And if it's not, and I can't make a business case for it being that way, given what we're doing now, I need to use somebody else's infrastructure for that so that I'm only paying for what I use. And that's especially the case if you're talking about getting the really expensive stuff like the big NVIDIA GPU array units, which are power hungry and heat monsters and expensive and somewhat difficult to get a hold of at the moment because
right?
Azure's buying them up, Amazon's buying up, Google's buying them up, and you can get them through them as a service in some cases more easily, or at least way more quickly than you can get them for yourself for installation in your own data centers. So I think there's another argument there for resource availability and resource utilization that weighs strongly towards doing this in cloud.
Streamline your IT infrastructure by switching to a cloud-native print solution. You'll reduce infrastructure by eliminating print servers, get front-end and back-end print management. You'll be bridging the gap between automation, document management, and print. You'll secure your data end-to-end with native integrations and enjoy a zero-trust-enabled environment. Start a free 30-day trial by going to printerlogic.com/packet pushers. It also integrates easily with EMR and ERP solutions. Plus, a simplified scanning solution is included. You can automate capabilities, create no-code forms and workflows in the same admin account, have full visibility, and reduce print tickets by 90%. Start that free 30-day trial by going to printerlogic.com/packet pushers.
Well, I am going to agree and disagree. I think you have an excellent point both on resource availability and utilization. But I want to poke at that utilization because I think we're sort of cleverly talking about different things and saying, well, we disagree loudly because that dog is not a cat. And you have repeatedly said this is for R&D, for training purposes, et cetera. It is entirely possible to have, as is kind of standard in enterprise tech rollout, one solution for R&D and development and one solution for operation and prod and production.
Sure.
And it may be the case, and I would certainly concede this, that you want to do all your R&D in the cloud for all the reasons you pointed out. It's fast, it's available, and you don't know how much you're going to need until you do it. And then begin to think in terms of ops and prod based on the performance. You now have actual good insight onto the performance requirements, and you can think about first of all, you can plan in advance to get that NVIDIA gear. You can plan in advance. We haven't really talked about it, but you mentioned, power hungry, cooling power, and all of those things. And you may need to be upgrading your facility or alternatively use some kind of provider who will, even then, now that I'm thinking about it, from a power perspective, you would probably have to be doing some upgrades. So that gives you a little bit of a runtime to think about, okay, where would I put these edge devices? And do I have the facilities and can I meet the physical requirements of actually having them? So I think it's fair to say if you're doing R&D, do it in the cloud. If you're doing it, if you're in operations and production, consider what the application is for. And if it's IoT, you may be considering edge, if that makes sense.
I can't argue with that. You might. And if the inference operation can run more easily than the R&D on conventional hardware, you're probably in great shape. And that is often the case.
But let's talk a little bit about both, some of those requirements and some of those future considerations, because I know both of us are kind of looking into the future. John, I know you've got thoughts around storage, networking. We mentioned cooling and power. You may have some thoughts around carbon footprints. What are you thinking there?
Well, I am thinking mainly that most cloud providers are going to be better able to meet your needs in all those spaces than you can in your own enterprise data center when there's the degree of uncertainty and still finding our feet and feeling our way that there is in enterprise AI usage currently. I mean, we're still hearing folks saying, I can't even figure out how to make value come out of my engagement of these tools. So how am I going to justify a major in-house investment in the infrastructure necessary to develop them and train them and use them? So for storage, depending on what kind of thing you're doing, more is just basically the answer. What are you going to need? You're going to need more. Networking is interesting because
we're
for
just
like
arguing about it. Yes.
In and out of the enterprise, networking is not going to be about volume. It's going to be about latency for the most part.
Yes.
But within the development infrastructure, it's about volume and latency both, because you got to move a lot of data with as little latency as possible to make the training operations efficient. And so we hear from folks that this is one of those places where InfiniBand is making a new stand for continued relevance in the enterprise data center, because it had been steadily being pushed into edge case and then edge case on an edge case as the necessary technology for getting the volume and latency you need for high performance computing. Ethernet's been edging into its territory for over a decade.
You just like that word edge because you've used it in three different ways. We've used it in three different ways thus far. One in edge computing, one is edge case, and now an edging into.
Well, go figure.
Yeah, right?
English, it's such an interesting language.
It's such a perverse language. Carry on.
But InfiniBand is actually, even now in this application, facing competition from Ethernet as the folks in the high-end Ethernet space continue to push capacity and push improved performance parameters so that you can get the levels of low latency with losslessness that are necessary to make these training operations work even faster. So in networking, your data center probably doesn't have an InfiniBand infrastructure. And are you going to get into that and develop expertise in that? Or are you going to outsource that to the cloud providers who actually do have this in some places and do have expertise in it? Power, cooling, it's kind of a mixed bag there, because a lot of folks have excess capacity in theory because they've, sent 2/3 of their IT work out into the cloud in one way or another. And they're still retaining stuff in their data center, but it's like 1/3 of what they're doing instead of the majority. So they've got excess capacity. The question is, do they have excess capacity with the ability to focus it on, like the super pizza ovens that are NVIDIA GPU units? They may have enough overall capacity, but not be able to concentrate it enough to make running these things safe and effective. And yes, you mentioned carbon footprint. I think it's always reasonable to say, that the big cloud providers probably have a better path towards carbon neutrality than you do at your company. And in fact, part of your carbon neutrality strategy as a company is generally shifting use from in-house data centers to cloud infrastructures. I mean, most enterprises we've talked to have said that's part of the strategy.
Well, and I'd like to actually talk to you about that on a side note, and I would love to hear from any listeners. Carbon neutrality and sustainability were huge buzzwords about 15 years ago and 10 years ago. And now it seems to have faded away or been edged out of the limelight. There you go. By other concerns. We probably need to actually ask our clients as part of our next research project how much it matters to them anymore. Because I haven't heard anyone in a year at least sit down and say, I'm building a new data center and I'm really worried about carbon footprint. I don't know what you're hearing.
I'm hearing that the planet is still on fire. So we should probably ask them if they care about that and then ask them about the carbon plans they've got. But even if they're not talking about carbon footprint, they are still talking about improving efficiencies in their own consumption and use of natural resources. It may no longer be at the top level of reporting, but it's been built into the sort of institutional thought structure in a lot of places. So I think it's still going to have an important effect on what they're doing.
And I am happy to hear from people who say, yes, carbon footprints matter and you people should be paying attention to them, or from people saying, you're right, we've just stopped caring. And either way, I'm just curious.
I'm going to add to that, though. If they don't care anymore, like at the official, it's not in my strategic planning or reporting anymore. Is it a part of their daily planning or tactical planning to go for the most energy efficient options?
Yeah. No, I understand there's an overlap. It's the same thing with renewable energy and what is it? Natively produced energy. In other words, if you are able to produce all your own energy, you are much more secure from a standpoint of national security than you are if you have to be importing energy. So there's two totally different reasons to come to the same point. I'm actually just interested in this one reason in this case. Everybody wants to keep their energy bills down. I'm just curious how many people are still explicitly worried about carbon footprint at the moment. But moving along from that, I think the other thing that people need to keep in mind is kind of two things. One is you and I are both fascinated by neuromorphic computing.
Yes.
Just for those who are going neuro, what? It's computing that takes its architectural model from the brain, which is effectively a sparse matrix of neurons. So the idea is most of the neurons are not firing. The activity kind of migrates all around the brain, where firing, as we've all seen from MRI scans, we can actually figure out kind of what's going on by looking at where the migration is going. And neuromorphic computers work the same way at least some versions of them. Instead of having everything operating all the time and consuming power, you actually can reduce power by a couple orders of magnitude, if I'm not incorrect. You're holding up 3 fingers there, John. 3 orders of magnitude. That's a lot. That's from 1,000 down to 1. And it's simply by the architecture of the computing platform. And we know that there are companies doing this. I know we both are familiar with the company that came out of the Spinnaker project in Germany.
Yeah. SpinCloud.
SpinCloud, that's what it's called. What's interesting to me is SpinCloud is sort of an agnostic platform that can work well for AI as well as working for, say, quantum computing. And that's the other thing to think about when you're trying to make your decisions about cloud versus edge, which is, do you imagine at some future point putting in an investment in quantum computing, in AI, maybe not today because the use cases are still being hammered out for both of them, but downstream, you may want to think about that as you're doing your 5 and 10-year strategic plan, because that's where, especially once again, if you're using computing to drive devices in the real world, which I think is the next big thing. If that's what you're thinking about, you really want to be thinking about where you would put edge computing if you thought it became necessary.
Yes, I think there's going to be lots more development in alternative computing architectures, and that's going to go all the way down to the chip level as well as up to the system design level to mimic the efficiencies of biological systems in computing, and that is going to radically alter the landscape around AI development and training. I mean, when something can come in and take 0.1% of the power that NVIDIA takes to do the same amount of training, it's going to upend NVIDIA's apple cart. They're going to have to either buy those companies or try and compete with them. And it's going to be really difficult for them to make the argument that you should deal with the heat spill and deal with the huge electricity draw to do the same thing. Because, and I don't think there's going to be much after that because that makes a lot of sense except to NVIDIA's bottom line. So neuromorphic is going to be huge and it's going to change these calculations, but it also is 2 to 7 years away from being something most folks would be able to get their hands on and deploy in their own data centers. So in the 2 to 7 year time frame, I think we're still talking about most folks need to do cloud most of the time for their AI stuff.
I can't disagree with you there, John, but I will just remind you that the title of this show is Heavy Strategy, and strategy is not what happens after lunch, which it is in all too many organizations, but actually in that 2 to 7 year time frame. So that's about all we've got time for today. Thanks for joining us. If you've got feedback or follow-up for us on this topic, send us a message at packetpushers.net/FU. That stands for follow-up, hold the Snickers. And if you feel like calling us the mold in your blue cheese, we would love to hear that. We consider that a compliment. Also at packetpushers.net, you'll find the Network Break podcast, which helps you stay current on the latest tech news and what it means. Very relevant as you grapple with these kinds of issues. And there's a whole lot more on that site, so go check it out. If you want to talk to me or to John, you can reach us at nemertes.com. That is N like Nancy, E-M like Mary, E-R-T like Thomas, E-S like Sam.com, nemertes.com. And however you reach out, we look forward to hearing from you.